joined by Sally Davey, the CEO of Travalyst, and luckily for us, sustainability, which is our topic, has been kind of a theme today with the previous session and kind of a few articles written today on Phocuswright, our sister news site. So Sally, can you just give a quick introduction to the work Travalyst has done in this space?
Great, yeah, thanks, Mark. So Travalyst is a coalition that came together at the back end of 2019. It was founded by the Duke of Sussex with 5 leading companies in the travel space: Booking.com, Skyscanner, Trip.com Group, TripAdvisor, and Visa, with the idea of collaborating to mainstream sustainability. So our North Star basically of this group is to help consumers everywhere make better choices for themselves, but for the planet. Yeah.
Okay, so better choices for the planet. That seems to be a very complex idea. It's something that could almost overwhelm some people. So can you kind of demystify what responsible tourism can be and maybe give some examples where we as an industry or even consumers can start?
Yeah, it is a complex problem and requires a complex set of solutions, but it doesn't have to be complex in terms of the approaches that each of our organizations can take. I'd start by, I think, defining the term, because there are a lot of different definitions out there as to what responsible or sustainable tourism is, and that doesn't help. But I can tell you that Travalyst defines sustainable tourism as a no-harm outcome, where tourism's impact on people and planet is only a positive one, which is pretty ambitious, and we may never get there, but I think that has to be our kind of unremitting goal. So from Travalyst perspective, it's as much about the socioeconomic impact as the environmental side, which I think is often the side that we talk about when it comes to sustainability. So that's making sure that tourism locally is driving up living standards and livelihoods that can then have significant knock-on impacts into other social benefits and societal impacts. So yeah, in terms of, I guess, demystifying, I think we often put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer to just think about this as a really simple user experience, right? So I'm a working mum, don't have a ton of time. When I'm booking if I'm lucky, once a year holiday, it's actually a really complex experience. If I want to account for all the different requirements that I and my family have, alongside making sure that all of those travel purchases adhere to the same ethical standards I have at home, that's not easy. The information is hard to find. It's quite fragmented. It's really hard often to understand if you don't have a PhD. And so what we're trying to do really with this coalition is make sure that for that consumer, that we're providing consistent and clear information across all the places I might go when I'm booking a trip. So basically, really simply, help me make a better choice that I can have a great time, but also feel good about the choices I'm making.
You bring up the consumer's perspective, and we've seen a lot of research lately from various sources, Booking.com being one, where travelers want to make better choices, but then we also see research that they don't want to spend more for these choices. So what do you kind of view that kind of little battle between the two?
Yeah, it's a great point. And you're right, Booking and many of our partners have data that talk about consumers who prior to the pandemic wanted to be making better choices. And there is this real intention to action gap. Consumers want to do more, want to spend their money in the right places, but just don't know how, which again is the kind of founding principle of this coalition. But I think that there's a really important question to address as to whether consumers would have to spend more, right? So when we think about on the supplier side, and this is a really important point, I think this assumption that doing good business costs more, I think that's actually not a valid assumption anymore. When we think about things like the energy space, right? So now in many markets worldwide, renewables are at price parity with fossil fuels. Or if we think about waste and action that tons of brilliant companies are taking to reduce waste, be it like toiletries, mini toiletries bottles, right? All these things actually can encompass cost savings, which in themselves could be passed on to consumers. So I don't think it's actually as simple as that. And I think it's a really important message that we should be moving away from, that sustainability costs more, because then I think it changes the discussion about whether consumers will pay more, because we need more data on where and when consumers may be flexible on price and where they might not be. And that's a really big driving force of the work that we're thinking about. Where is it that we can help consumers access the low-hanging fruit and where it doesn't cost more? And when maybe it does cost more, how can we help support that journey? So a great example here again, from one of our partners, Skyscanner, they have the Greener Choices tool on their flight meta search. And what they showed in 2019 was that over 10 million customers chose the lowest CO2 flight option. And that's kind of regardless of the price, and frequently, obviously, not the lowest price. So I think there is data out there to show that consumers want to make the right choices, don't know how. It doesn't always have to be more expensive, either on the supply or the consumer side. We just have to make sure that the right options are there on both sides.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. It's still almost, at least in the travel space, still new. So we're not really sure where the costs are really coming from. But in taking the lead, should it really be kind of the industry making the decisions that we're going to make this initiative, or should we, I don't want to say wait for the consumers to show they want it, but in a sense, have the consumers kind of show us where they want us to go?
It's a great point. And the kind of the ultimate chicken and egg, I think the simple answer is that it's not down to any one driving factor or any one party to kind of drive the market forward. We all have a role to play and a responsibility in getting to the right outcome. So it's industry and governments, NGOs, destinations, and consumers too, right? Governments inevitably are slow, so we're going to need probably the market to catalyze the change. And the role of the consumer, right, in that is probably the most under-leveraged piece to date. We've generally made it pretty hard for consumers to do the right thing and show us that they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. And so, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we think a lot about this kind of intention to action gap and how we can help start to bridge that. But broadly, yeah, this has to be a kind of a full systems approach. So we have to make sure that the traveler role is unlocked and that travelers can play their part. But we also have to make sure as the industry we're playing our part, and again, in collaboration with governments and destination organizations, etc. It's the whole kind of system picture.
I guess, being that it's a whole system working together, how can we avoid maybe multiple parts of that system trying to fix the same problem? I mean, when you have a lot of problems going on, whether it be social or environmental, you have maybe too many people trying to focus on one thing. How do we bridge it out to maybe a more holistic approach?
I think that is the absolute billion-dollar question. And it's one that we think about a ton, because so the way I interpret that is that it's all about aligning, right? It's kind of complex problems require complex solutions and kind of true systems change. And you have to have this picture of the whole system and all the different levers, and make sure to the best of your ability that not only are you clear on your role within that, but you're aligning with all the other parts. And I think this alignment piece we've seen really be a significant focus over the last year. How is it that as an industry, not just on the commercial side, but the whole system, how do we align our efforts so we're all in one boat, rowing in the same direction, but the NGO sector are focused over here doing their bit, and we as the platforms are over here doing our bit. And I think so, you know, one of the key things I would say in terms of then identifying each of the roles that we should be playing is just not duplicating approaches. Not, you know, there's a ton of great initiatives out there that have launched with the best intentions, but often are a duplication or a very kind of have a real kind of similarity to other great initiatives that are already out there in the field based on best practice, doing great work. So I think we all have a responsibility to identify what's already happening, whether there are initiatives that are already spinning up that we can join and we can support and we can play a role in. I think the thing we have to absolutely avoid is spinning up too many individual and fragmented efforts. We've all got to focus on how we kind of, play our role within the system rather than going off in a separate direction. Yeah,
everyone kind of be their own puzzle piece within this giant puzzle of the world. And I think one thing you brought up is like we've truly as an industry been aligned on sustainability. It's gotten more coverage. It's become a topic of conversation. So how do we keep it top of mind, as a lot of this maybe has gotten into the public eye because of the pandemic? So as things return to normal, how do we kind of don't let it get pushed under the rug, in a sense, for maybe some economic gains?
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. I think this is such an important point, and it's like 50% of Travalyst focus. I do think that as an industry, you're right, we've reached a tipping point when we see how much of the agenda today has focused on sustainability, and these issues are in our collective consciousness now. We're firmly in the climate emergency. There's no going back. So the issues are there to stay. And it's interesting as well when we think about, like you were saying earlier, that our partners and the industry at large are hearing more and more demand from consumers. So it appears to be that both from the supply and the consumer side, there is this collective consciousness. And so from Travalyst's perspective, I think we have to capitalize on that and really use that as our catalyst moment to kind of make this the mainstream way to do business, the mainstream way to think about your trip. And so from Travalyst's perspective, the kind of the coalition that we have that represents obviously some fairly major consumer platforms is a really big part of that, creating that unified approach to presenting consumers globally with the same information about sustainability to help them make good choices. The other side of that, I think, is a role that Travalyst probably will start to play increasingly from the back end of this year, which is around raising global public awareness as to the key role that sustainable tourism specifically plays within global sustainability goals. Because, we know that tourism has a phenomenally significant footprint globally, environmentally, but also in terms of livelihoods, 1 in 10 jobs worldwide. We all know that. But I think when we think about the bigger global debate on climate change and sustainability, tourism is often sidelined and kind of actually underappreciated in terms of the potential and the kind of the long-term outcomes that we can help deliver. So I think Travalyst is increasingly playing a role in that piece, making sure that, we keep this on the agenda and that we focus on the fact that recovery and long-term resilience go hand in hand with sustainability.
And I like how you brought that in, that we can create a sustainable future with it. Economic goals in mind. And I think you brought up earlier kind of local tourism. Maybe can you shed a little more light on some of that? Maybe local tours or kind of not only focus on the environment, but enriching the local communities that we're actually trying to visit on a lot of our trips.
It's an absolutely critical part of sustainability, right? Like sustainability is environmental, socioeconomic, governance, especially in tourism. When we think about destinations, the experience, it's so much about the people who live there, the places we want to see, the local culture, the food, the heritage. This is all part of the product that we are selling and that we want to be selling way into the long future. So it makes sense as an industry, right, that we want to not just support and preserve that, but also regenerate where appropriate, where tourism can actually reach places that perhaps other industries can't, or historically, areas that historically had significant other industries and now do not. Tourism holds major opportunities to spread real economic benefit, and those things have a domino effect, right? You employ parents in a locale, and certainly in more emerging areas, that actually has a direct impact on health and education outcomes. Kids can go to school, health outcomes are much better, and so tourism again has this significant kind of the real breadth of impact, but also the depth of impact at that local community level. But it's critical that communities and local people have a really clear voice and real clear ownership in the system. At the moment, I think we're still operating in probably quite a historic model where we kind of deliver consumers to the destination and that's sort of it. Whereas when we think about really smart long-term destination planning, we have to think holistically. We have to work with local governments and destination marketers to think about how we present the destination in a way that's it makes sense not just for consumers, but also for local people. Those local voices have to be really a significant part of that discussion and that decision making. So this is a really critical part of ensuring that we've got a sustainable industry for the long term.
Yeah, kind of that partnership between not only the tourism industry, but the actual communities to maybe avoid certain things that we've seen a lot of noise about in the industry the last couple of years, like over tourism, maybe displacing local communities. But so that's kind of a good way of maybe going through the future. And I'm thinking of the future, as I just saw, we probably have about 1 minute left. Just 10 years from now, what would you say is a success for yourself and Travalyst in terms of kind of responsible or sustainable travel?
So myself personally and the Travalyst organization?
Yes, both.
Okay, well, I'll start with Travalyst. That's probably easier. Well, I guess if our North Star is to help consumers everywhere make better choices, it will be that we're succeeding with that mission. So we will have very clear data to show that not only have we helped to catalyze the market in favor of travelers making better choices and that we've bridged that intention to action gap, I think we'll also be able to demonstrate that that has helped growth and innovation on the supply side. So it just becomes the mainstream way of doing business. That's our North Star. And in 10 years' time, I think that's how we'll feel that we are either there or certainly on the way to success. On the personal side, I think it goes back to that system point. I'm a great believer in the potential that tourism holds to create a better world generally, and the fact that if we, as all the different stakeholders in tourism, can work together effectively, we can have a very, very significant and positive impact. So if I can play a role in bringing those pieces together and helping create those outcomes, then I'll be delighted.
That's wonderful. Thank you for joining me, Sally, and hopefully that world can be created as we all put a little more effort into it after this past year.
We're doing our best. Thanks, Mark.